I'm going to talk to you about sandpaper and sanding today. You can see a couple different varieties of sanding material. The traditional is the wet-dry sandpaper, and that comes in several grits. You can see a low number here, 220, then 320, working its way up to 400, and I'll also use 600. This is a very common sandpaper that's readily available online and in hardware stores. The lower the number, the coarser the sandpaper. The higher the number, the finer the grit of the sandpaper. We also have a flexible sandpaper. You can see here, this one actually can be cut with scissors. This micron sandpaper has a different measurement. This is 40 microns, and this is a plastic-backed sanding paper, and it also can be cut with scissors. We also have sanding sponges. That gives you a little bit of a cushioned back whenever you're sanding surfaces where you want a little bit of a give. And this one is measured in fine, ultrafine, superfine, and medium coarse as well. One of the things that I like to do with a full sheet of sandpaper is to tear it down to size if I need to. This allows me to have pieces of sandpaper that are easier for me to use. I can then fold the sandpaper in half and make sure that it has a nice rigid surface in case I need to get into certain areas. To tear the sandpaper, you could hold it onto the edge of your table or just take something like a steel ruler or other implement and just tear against it. And you can see that it separates very well. Whenever working with this type of material, I'll just use a good pair of scissors. So let's talk about some tools that can help you sand. The sanding stick is the most common one that we use. Here we have a handmade one, block of wood, the sandpaper is wrapped around it. This is a store-bought one, and you can see spring-loaded here, so all I have to do is purchase the bands of sandpaper and replace that. Has a nice taper to it there. This one allows you to use your own sandpaper, and all you do is open it up and put in a new piece whenever the old one gets dull. So these are sanding sticks. Another common thing that we can use is just a clipboard. And you can put a piece of tape down at the bottom to hold that in place. And now I can use this to sand my work. When sanding your work, you want to make sure that your hand that holds it is very well braced. So I firmly brace the hand holding the object, and then I hold my sanding stick just like I would a file, and I can push and come back. But remember, this is a controlled stroke. Sandpaper cuts in every direction. My objective here is to make sure I don't round my corners. Essentially, the same care that you took with your file, you will take with your sanding stick. If I have a round object that I need to sand, I will do the same thing. Brace it, but now I'm going to follow the form and come around. Sanding sticks really allow us to create clean, crisp edges. If I want to soften my edge a little bit, what I might do is I might switch to a sanding sponge and allow that cushion to wrap around the piece. So remember, if you want clean and crisp, you're going to use your sanding stick, or back your sandpaper some way. If you want it to be softer, well then you might use a sanding sponge or a felt pad or even a rubber pad to back the sandpaper. Whenever I'm sanding a wide flat area, I always want to sand in an X pattern. So I'll go in one direction, then turn it perpendicular and go in another direction. This will make sure your sanding is even, and also if you have a scratch that is in one of the sanding directions, that will be hidden until I go perpendicular, and then it'll appear. So again, always sand in an X pattern whenever you're doing wide, flat surfaces. Another thing that we can do is tape the sandpaper down to a piece of glass, or this is 1/4 inch thick plexi, and by taping it down, it holds the sandpaper securely, so if I do need to sand one surface of a piece, I can either take a wad of tape, and that'll help hold it, and I can sand it that way, or I can use a kneaded eraser or some fun tack will do that. Whenever I'm sanding, I want to sand in a figure-8 pattern. And I'm using this color piece here so you can see my pattern develop. A figure-8 pattern will make sure that I'm not applying uneven pressure. So by doing this, I'm actually pushing in all directions. If I just go back and forth like this, what's going to happen is I'm going to create a rocking motion, and the front and the back part could be unevenly sanded. I can take care of that by also going perpendicular, and that'll even it out. Now we're going to learn how to make a sanding stick. I have my sandpaper. You can see here it is 320 grit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a piece of wood that I got from the hardware store. This is about 1/4 inch thick, and I cut it to the length that I need it. First thing that I do is I'm going to put tape down on the grit side of my sandpaper. Notice I'm overlapping a little bit. So I want to have an exposed edge to the tape. Now I'm going to take my sandpaper, turn it over, the sticky side of the tape is up. I align my sanding stick with the edge of my sandpaper, and then I'll just wrap my tape to get started. This part really makes for a good sanding stick. I'm going to score, I'm using the back edge of my X-Acto blade. You can also use a scribe tool or any other device that's going to give you a crisp line. I score that, and now when I fold that, it's going to give me a really nice crease along the edge. So I'm not going to have rounded corners. I want to make sure that my corners are nice and crisp as I do this. Don't press too hard because you'll just cut your sandpaper. But notice how nice and crisp that edge is now. And then I'll finish wrapping it with the tape. Notice how nice and crisp my edge is now. That's because I scored it. To finish this off, I'll write down the sandpaper grit on the tape. As I'm using my sanding stick, as it gets dull, I just simply tear off that layer, and now I have a fresh piece underneath. And that's how you make a sanding stick. Occasionally you will need to get into a tight area. What I can do is take a small piece of sandpaper, and by making a cone, focusing the point around the center of one side, I can roll it and create a sanding cone. That sanding cone, held together with one piece of tape here, will be rigid enough for me to get into a tight area like next to a bezel. And that's how you make a sanding cone.